The Hokianga, the start and the heart of our Kiwi Catholic story. To see the significance of the Hokianga, we must go right back to the very beginning, to Christ himself. As Christ was dying on the cross, abandoned by most of his followers, we still can see that Mary and John, his beloved disciple, were there. From the cross, Jesus entrusts the care of his mother Mary into St. John's house, as implying that he didn't have any other siblings. He was the only son of Mary. The Acts of the Apostles tells us that Christians started to get persecuted in Jerusalem, so John responsibly took Mary to what we now call Asia Minor or Turkey, to Antioch, and then later to another place called Smyrna, also now known as Izmir in present-day Turkey, where he founded a church. The successor of St. John as leader of the Church of Smyrna, what we'd now call the Bishop of Smyrna, was St. Polycarp. St. Polycarp wrote about hearing Jesus' words recounted by John himself, and so he became a link between the apostolic or early church and the apostles and Jesus himself. So he was eventually caught up in another Roman persecution of Christians, and they threatened it to burn him alive. At this stage, in the mid-100s AD, Polycarp was a very old man, and early tradition quotes him as saying, 86 years I've served him, Jesus, and he has done me no wrong. And so he committed himself to not betray his Lord, even at the cost of his death. The successor bishop from St. Polycarp was St. Irenaeus. St. Irenaeus wrote about hearing Polycarp relate how he conversed with John and many others who had seen Jesus Christ, the words he had heard from their own mouths. So again, another direct connection through the centuries to Jesus himself and that oral tradition of the gospel. St. Irenaeus travelled again to found another church, this time at Lyon in France. So when we're looking at Irenaeus' travel from Smyrna or Izmir to Lyon, we need to remember that the superhighways of the ancient world were not on land, they were the rivers and the seas. And so we see the ease of travel from what's now Western Turkey right through the Mediterranean up the river to Lyon, which was a major trading centre since Roman times. And that's where he founded his church. The church that Irenaeus founded in Lyon was one that would remain strong for many, many hundreds of years. And that brings us to France in the late 1700s. You may recognize this terrible instrument known as the guillotine, which was used to massacre thousands of royalists and also members of the clergy, the Catholic Church, who were enemies of the French revolutionaries. And so we come to a very sad stage in France's history, where the Catholic Church was under mortal threat from the revolutionaries of France. And that really sets a stage for what is quite a historical miracle. The French Revolution led to the rise of Napoleon, the great emperor of France, who initiated a series of very costly Europe-wide conflicts, which ended up in great devastation for France. After Napoleon's defeat, the church had some respite from the revolutionaries, and a young priest, Jean-Claude Collin, founded the Society of Mary in Lyon. The Society of Mary, or as we now call them, the Marists, were both priests and brothers, and they had a common commitment to spreading the gospel throughout the world, which was opening up through the advent of global trade through the different European empires. And one of the priests, a young priest who was associated with the Marists, was Jean-Baptiste Pompallier, and he was inspired as well to become a missionary to spread the gospel, to leave his aristocratic and army service behind and serve the Lord in that capacity. At the age of 34, the Pope made him Vicar Apostolic of Western Oceania, which at that stage was around about 1/6 of the Earth's surface. So this was quite an astounding responsibility for a young man to undertake. It really tells us a lot about the confidence that the church had in Pompallier, and also the massive challenge that lay ahead of him to spread the gospel in this fresh field of planting the gospel. So we can see that backed by the newly formed Society of Mary and some wealthy local businessmen, Pompallier set out down the river from Lyon to the Mediterranean Sea, and they travelled right through the Mediterranean Sea, through the Straits of Gibraltar. They sailed south around South America and into the Eastern Pacific Ocean. And they sailed into the Vicariate of Western Oceania, as you can see there. So as Pompallier was travelling through this vast region of ocean, he stopped off at Futuna, which was a place where he dropped off Saint Pierre Chanel, one of his priests, who, in the attempts to spread the gospel in Futuna, was martyred for the faith. So he's now Saint Peter Chanel, and it's a real sad event that, unfortunately, due to the difficulties in travel and communication at the time, Pompallier didn't get news of his death for at least 18 months afterwards, and then had to undertake another arduous journey in the schooner the Sancta Maria to retrieve his remains. After dropping off Father Pierre Chanel to Futuna, Pompallier then went to Sydney to consult with the bishop that was there to decide the best approach to setting up a headquarters. And in Australia he heard of the Pointons. They were a strongly Catholic family, a fairly wealthy timber merchant who lived in Hokianga, and they were recommended to Pompallier as a great start for starting his mission. So Pompallier then decided to sail across and to meet them and go from there. Here is a very, very early sketch, probably from a Marist priest, of the Marist priests in New Zealand evangelizing. And the question is posed, why should the Māori pay any attention to the missionaries? There are various reasons why the missionaries had some success. right? And a lot of that was to do with the general welcome that the tangata whenua gave to the Europeans in terms of the trade and economic opportunities that were offered. They also relished the opportunity to learn the written languages that were brought in, and to gain influence within their own political systems. When Pompelia first arrived, the Māori are recorded to have had a fairly positive impression of him. He was, in fact, the first Christian bishop to get to New Zealand. The other denominations having sent many missionaries, but no one of the equivalent status of a bishop. And so the Māori term for the Catholics was pekapo, or a transliteration of the term bishop, and they were impressed that that a rangatira, that a chief of the Catholics had decided to settle in their and spread the gospel in their land. Pompelia was ahead of his time in his understanding of and respect for local customs, local language, and he spent a great deal of time learning te reo and giving instructions to his missionaries to respect generally the customs and the practices of the local people, where they did not directly contradict the gospel, which sounds like common sense to us. It was a fairly enlightened view for the time. One of the real treasures that our church has in its archives in New Zealand is the records of these early Marist missionaries, the priests and brothers who had come out from France and wrote back regularly to the headquarters back in France to relate their challenges and also their successes. This is one extract from Father Jean-Baptiste Petit-Jean to the head of the order, Father Jean-Claude Collin, back in France, writing from Kororareka, where the Marists in Pompelia had eventually relocated their headquarters to from the Hokianga, as it was much more populated and busy place to spread the gospel in. He wrote in his letter back, "When in the silence of meditation I compare our poverty, our isolation, to that of religious pomp of Catholic European countries, my heart is moved and I find myself weeping. And what I say to myself, am I then like Israel, captive on the banks of the Euphrates River? Oh, far from me are such thoughts. My happiness and my consolation are above all. If I do not see the beautiful temples, the rich churches, pompous ceremonies, I have the advantage of being with Jesus Christ, but with Jesus Christ poor, without refuge, but with Jesus almost abandoned and with no place to lay my head. The places where we offer the holy sacrifice are transformed into temples. I am a traveller with Jesus. No country is foreign for the minister of Jesus Christ. Everywhere he finds brothers and sisters." And this extract is emblematic of the humanism with which these early Marist missionaries approached their tasks. They had a real respect and sense of brotherhood with the tangata whenua, and even today the local people of the Hokianga remember these brave men with a huge amount of respect. As I said before, the Hokianga Catholics, the Hokianga Māori who had become Catholic and welcomed Pompelia to live among them, were sad and quite offended when he did move over to Kororareka on the other side of the top of the North Island, now known as Russell. But for Pompelia, who was under a huge amount of pressure to to establish a viable and successful mission, this really seemed the only right choice for him to move to the capital of this very young country. Another sad episode of abandonment when it came to the mission to the Māori was the New Zealand Wars. The evangelization of the Catholic Church in New Zealand was very successful in the 1940s and 50s, but as time went on, the conflicts over resources and land really swept up the Catholic mission in New Zealand and destroyed a lot of those opportunities and relationships that were there between the two groups. And the Catholic priests went away from the Hokianga for an extended period of time. While they were away, the local leaders, in particular people like Jeremiah Tawaki, stepped into the gap left by the European missionaries and took the faith which had been given to him and kept it alive within his community. Around a decade later, when the Catholic priests finally came back to the Hokianga, they were surprised to find a thriving faith community that was there due to the leadership of the local people like Jeremiah Tawaki. And during this time is when St. Peter's Church was built. St. Peter's Church in Hokianga, in Pangaru, was built during this time of attempts at re-establishment of the mission to the Māori in this area. It was one of a number of churches designed or built by Father Karl Krimborg. Here's a range of examples of churches in the Hokianga and surrounding areas built and designed by Father Karl, and they form just a real tangible link to this early part of the Catholic mission to the north. Jeremiah Tawaki, the Māori catechist and chief who kept alive the faith in the Hokianga, who was probably baptized by Bishop Pompallier, or one of his confreres, had a child who became famous nationally as an amazing leader for the whole country, Dame Whina Cooper. She was a strong Catholic woman who melded her Catholic faith with her deep sense of respect for her own Māori culture and became a national icon. So the Hokianga is a very special place for New Zealand Catholics, preserving the beginnings of our faith in the country, and not only the beginnings of our faith, but leading us back through the apostolic succession, right through the current Bishop of Auckland, right back to Pompallier, right back to Leon, to Irenaeus in Smyrna, to Polycarp, to St. John, to Jesus himself. So a real treasure of history and faith for us all.